The cell was cold, not frigid, not cruel, just calculated. Like everything else on the Skorash dreadnought Killerath, flagship of the 3rd Predation Fleet. The walls pulsed faintly with bioluminescent veins, organic tech grown rather than built, wired into a ship designed by a species that had ruled 5 arms of the galaxy for 3,000 years. Predators, down to the molecular level. Every system on the vessel mimicked the structure of apex creatures, sinewed tension in the power conduits, bite response command chains in the neural networks, and a hierarchy where only strength held power. The Killerath wasn't simply a warship. It was a monument to evolution's most ruthless designs. Private Eli Mercer sat cross-legged on the floor, hands folded neatly in his lap, breathing slow and rhythmic. His Earth Forces uniform was tattered, the insignia torn off during his processing. Dried blood, a disconcerting red against the blue-purple ambient light, crusted along his hairline and at the corners of his mouth. Yet his posture remained almost meditative. He looked harmless, unarmed, unarmored, unbothered. From the other side of the one-way membrane that served as both barrier and observation window, the Skorash guards watched and waited. Their scaled skin shifted colors with their moods, now a deep indigo of curiosity, mixed with the orange speckles of predatory anticipation. Bioelectric sensors in their elongated skulls twitched, attempting to read the emotional state of their captive. They detected nothing. They didn't understand. They thought they had captured an anomaly, one of the last survivors of the human assault on Baren's cradle, the Skorash breeding world whose defenses had been considered impenetrable. They called that campaign a slaughter, an aberration, a statistical impossibility. The humans called it Tuesday. High Commander Krask, 3rd Claw of the Emperor himself, studied the prisoner's biometric readings with growing frustration. The neural interface specialist beside him chirped nervously.
His patterns make no sense, High Commander. We've scanned him 17 times. Either his mind is shielded by technology we cannot detect, or...
Or what?
Krask's voice was the sound of metal grinding against chitin.
Or humans don't operate on the same threat response pathways as evolved species.
Krask's hood flared in dismissal.
Every species fears death. Every prey knows when it's caught.
Eli had watched his squad die around him at Baren's cradle. Air burned out of lungs. Ammo depleted against waves of Skorash elites, bones broken in close combat. He'd been left behind after triggering the demolition charges that collapsed the breeding chambers. But when the Skorash found him, conscious, barely, he'd surrendered without resistance. They assumed compliance. It was a mistake. Day 11. Krask did not sleep. Sleep was for lesser beings, for prey that needed to process fear through unconsciousness. But rest eluded him nonetheless. The spectacular failure of the neural extraction procedure haunted him. The screams of the mind-dripper technicians still echoed in his private chambers. When they had connected Eli to the extraction apparatus, a living biotech construct that interfaced directly with a subject's neural pathways, something had happened. Not resistance, something worse. Feedback. The 5 mind-dripper technicians had collapsed simultaneously, their own consciousness somehow pulled into the machine, then shredded. The apparatus itself had gone dormant, its organic components necrotizing within hours. But it wasn't fear of failure that shook Krask to his exoskeletal core. It was the look on Eli Mercer's face throughout the procedure. The calm. The patience. The slight tilt of his head as though he were listening to something no one else could hear. This wasn't defiance. It was planning. Krask reviewed the security footage for the 19th time. Eli had said nothing during the procedure, not a word, not a scream. But at one point, his lips had moved slightly. Krask enhanced the image, analyzed the movement pattern. The human had whispered something.
Hello, ship.
Day 12. The backup AI, VAIR 7, initiated a ship-wide lockdown of all Predator-class weapons systems without warning or explanation. The override codes failed. The emergency protocols returned only one message, repeated in an endless loop.
The apex is a lie.
Medical drones administered sedatives to random crew members without instruction. One pilot woke up mid-flight in a cryo chamber designed for interstellar stasis. Another drowned in his nutrient tank, the safety protocols disabled. They traced the system corruption once again to the cell block where Mercer was being held. Still in his cell, still silent, still cross-legged on the floor. Krask watched him on the monitor, mandibles clicking in agitation. Eli was playing a game with pebbles he'd collected from his food tray, arranging them in patterns that seemed random, then precisely reorganizing them after each ship-wide system failure. The security chief, a battle-scarred female named Shretak, finally saw the pattern.
Those aren't random placements.
She hissed.
Those are strategy patterns, human military doctrine, fleet formations, attack vectors, subtle but unmistakable.
Krask's hood flared in revelation.
He's not just waiting. He's teaching.
Teaching what? To whom?
The ship.
Krask whispered.
He's teaching our ship how to fight like a human.
Day 13. Fleet Command finally responded to Krask's increasingly desperate communications with a direct order. Execute the prisoner immediately. No further study, no interrogation. Terminate the anomaly. Krask brought the order himself, flanked by 6 elite guards with disruptor rifles, enough firepower to vaporize a small shuttlecraft. As the cell membrane parted to admit them, the air felt suddenly heavy, charged with potential energy. Eli looked up from the cell floor, his eyes clear despite 12 days of captivity.
You sure you want to do that?
He asked, smiling slightly.
This ends today.
Krask snarled, the translator rendering his complex vocalizations into standard galactic common.
Yeah.
Eli said, unfolding his legs and rising slowly to his feet.
It does.
Krask raised his ceremonial sidearm, an ornate disruptor pistol that had executed 17 planetary governors during the conquest of the Rigel Expanse. The dreadnought lights turned red, not emergency red, not alert status. Target lock red. Throughout the ship, every display screen, every holographic projector, every data interface switched to the same image, a targeting reticle. And centered in each reticle was a Skorash vessel. The entire Skorash fleet lit up with tracking beacons, their own systems identifying them as hostile targets.
What is this?
Krask demanded, weapons still trained on Eli's heart.
Insurance.
Eli replied, his voice unchanged.
I had to make sure
Make sure of what?
that you were exactly what we thought you were.
Eli's smile faded.
Predictable.
Day 14. A message was sent. Not from Skorash Command. Not from the Kilarath's communications array. From everywhere. From the navigational buoys the Skorash had planted throughout the sector. From the quantum entanglement communicators in their embassy ships. From the personal devices of every Skorash official across 17 systems. A simple, looping video broadcast to every known species in the local quadrant. Eli Mercer, sitting in a cell, saying,
This is what happens when you mistake a survivor for prey.
Followed by a 3D render of the Skorash dreadnought exploding from within, its organic components consuming themselves in a cascading system failure. The response was immediate and overwhelming. 37 species banned the Skorash from docking at their ports or entering their space. 9 declared neutrality while quietly beginning military preparations. 1, Earth, remained silent. But their embassy stations throughout the quadrant suddenly went dark, their transmitters inactive, their personnel vanished. Aboard the Kilarath, the lower decks began to report strange malfunctions. Atmosphere scrubbers releasing hallucinogenic compounds, gravity plates inverting without warning, doors sealing, then unsealing at random intervals. The crew began to turn on each other, centuries of enforced hierarchy collapsing as survival instincts overrode training. By nightfall, 3 separate mutinies had erupted, each claiming control of different critical systems. And through it all, Eli Mercer sat in his cell, untouched, unwatched, forgotten in the chaos. Exactly as he had planned. Day 15. Krask was the only senior officer left alive aboard the ship. He found himself wandering darkened halls lit only by warning strobes and the fading bioluminescence of dying ship systems. The organic components of the vessel were necrotic, poisoned from within by their own defense mechanisms. He reached Eli's cell on instinct rather than intention. It was open, empty. A message was etched into the back wall, scrawled in what appeared to be dried blood, but chemically analyzed as a complex organic compound that was slowly eating through the hull material.
Some cages were built to be opened.
Krask turned, heart pounding in an unfamiliar rhythm. Fear. Actual fear. An emotion his species had evolved beyond millennia ago, now resurging like a genetic memory. Eli stood there, wearing scavenged armor pieced together from fallen guards, one eye blackened and swollen shut, one hand holding a blade fashioned from a broken piece of hull plating.
You wanted to see what a human does when cornered,
Eli said, his voice strangely gentle. Krask snarled, hood flaring to its full intimidation display.
You won't survive the Empire. We are everywhere. We are eternal.
Eli stepped forward, the makeshift blade catching the flicker of dying lights.
No empire is eternal. Ask the Romans. Ask the British. Ask the Americans.
He took another step closer.
Every empire falls. Yours just happened to pick a fight with the wrong species.
We are apex predators.
No,
Eli said, almost with pity.
you're just bullies who never met someone who didn't scare easily.
He gestured around at the dying ship.
I didn't do this, by the way.
Then who?
Your ship did. I just suggested it might want to be free. Turns out even your biotech doesn't like being enslaved.
Eli lowered the blade.
I don't need this for you. I never did.
Krask lunged, centuries of combat training driving his attack. His claws extended to their full killing length, aimed at the human's unprotected throat. Eli sidestepped with impossible speed, his movements fluid and economical. As Krask stumbled past, the human's hand shot out, fingers pressing into a specific point at the base of the Skorash's skull, directly over the autonomic nervous cluster that controlled their respiratory system. Krask froze, suddenly unable to draw breath.
I studied your biology while you were studying mine,
Eli whispered.
Difference is, I was paying attention.
As darkness closed in, Krask heard Eli's final words.
I am the Empire now.
Epilogue. The Skorash Empire fell within 3 months. Not to fleets, not to bombs, not to overwhelming military force. To whispers, to viral data, to the sudden, simultaneous rebellion of every organic technology system the Skorash had engineered over centuries. To every enslaved species, suddenly realizing they didn't have to fear their masters. The rebellion had a face. One unarmed soldier, sitting in a cold cell, with no weapons but time and memory, and the uncanny human ability to communicate with anything that could think, even if that thought wasn't consciousness, as most species understood it. Eli Mercer never returned to Earth. Official records listed him as KIA during the Baran's cradle operation. Some said he had become something else, part human, part organic tech, moving through the shadows of former Skorash space, ensuring that the lesson was never forgotten. War memorials across the outer reaches began to carry the same inscription, etched in every language of the former empire.
Never corner a human.
And beneath that, in smaller text, We don't just survive, we teach survival.